Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Harry Browne from RKD Architects. I'm going to present to you, I'll try and fly through it, presentation on maximising building use, so the potential for commercial office retrofit. This is a little bit of research that myself and some of my colleagues have been doing over the last kind of 6 months to a year, and then retrospectively looking at buildings that we had retrofitted, but the decisions to retrofit them weren't necessarily around ESG. They were commercial decisions, but we're now looking retrospectively about how they managed to capture the carbon, and thinking about how that will help us on the way forward for capturing the embodied carbon as well as the operational carbon of these buildings. So there's three kind of key themes that we look at for the research piece. The first one is obviously sustainability. So how building reuse can capture the embodied carbon, reduce construction waste, and enable a circular economy. Then imagination, with a bit of creative thinking, we can improve what are aging office buildings into newer, nicer office buildings that are attractive both to the city and to the people using them. And action, we realize we've done this before and we've had great results, so we will need to keep doing this into the future. That's an image of a project that was recently completed for iPut Stein House. Some people might remember what the old building looked like. It wasn't that exactly an attractive street environment or an attractive building, with a few simple moves, including adding to the facade, new lobby, and putting a cafe on the ground floor was quite meaningful to really improve the streetscape there and the attractiveness of that building. Quickly, I'll touch on this. It was a study done for Hibernia, and it's the building next door that RKD weren't involved in the retrofit of, but we were invited by Hibernia to do a case study on how to drive a building towards net zero. And interestingly, the definition of net zero is not very clear in our industry. There's a lot of carbon offsetting, there's a lot of greenwashing, as we've heard today. So they really tried to set the bar in their terms what net zero meant for the building alone without any offsetting. My colleague Richard O'Hagerty, who I think was already mentioned today, worked with the sustainability team in Hibernia, and they worked with a company called Symphony Engineering, which is a smart system that plugs into the BMS of the building and further drives the efficiency. So it takes recycles hot air, it turns off systems when they're not needed, etc. And that was a LEED Platinum building, and the energy efficiency was driven by a further 60 to 70%, which is pretty impressive. I think our stats are hopefully aligning here from the earlier presentations, but as we know, the built environment is 37% of national emissions. The split is roughly 2-to-1 between operational and embodied carbon. New buildings are performing well. We've done a lot of work as an industry over the last 15 years to improve the operational efficiency. So now we seriously need to look at the embodied carbon and how we bridge that gap to capture that. Commercial office buildings, as we know, are in a bit of a challenge at the moment in terms of vacancy. The vacancy rate, I think, is the highest it's ever been in the last 20, 30 years. People are working from home. There's a risk of vacancy increasing and more of what are called stranded assets coming up. So how do we get through that challenge? I heard Kieran Cuff at a talk recently say that 80% of buildings that need to be net zero by 2050 are already built. And then in the Irish context, 85% of Irish office buildings are below a B energy rating. So therein lies a massive challenge. And then looking retrospectively at some projects that we have done that were not necessarily done for embodied carbon reasons, but we look back and we see that you can make great office buildings in old buildings, whether this is Airbnb, the shell and core was done by RKD, and then the fit out by Henneken Penn. And it's a fantastic office space. It really is a kind of nice environment that people want to go to. So this is a study that I'll go into a little bit more detail on. It's 16 St. Stephen's Green. The client was October Investments. It has two types of old building, which makes it very interesting. It has a vintage 1980s building to the back, and it has a historic Georgian building to the front. So it had quite a lot of challenges in terms of building renovation. So it's a really interesting case study, I think, in terms of embodied carbon and how to reinvent old buildings. That's a section and plan diagram just to give you a feel for the scale and the scope of the project. So the grey building towards the front is the Georgian historic building. There was a 1980s extension out the back, and then we were able to find areas in the plan to extend. There's a link bridge in between, and we were able to extend on the roof as well. So increasing the density of the building is a good thing as well. Some images of the front, people would probably know the restaurant Peplo's is below in the basement. So the restoration and renovation of the historic building, quite extensive. The front of the building used to be covered in a lot of ivy. So part of the restoration works included removing that, repointing the brickwork, restoration of the facade details like stone pediments, and giving it, really bringing it back to its old glory, and it almost looks like a new building, even though it's over 200 years old. Some images of the inside of the building on the right. So the quite grand spaces of the Georgian type of architecture inside, with the original plasterwork and the original fireplaces, and it does make for nice ancillary office space like the lobby, breakout space, meeting rooms, etc. And then the link bridge in between, which had the facade completely replaced, brings you from that historic, it's kind of like a gateway from the historic building back to the more modern space. The modern 1980s building, as you can see the images on the left, the before images, it was quite dated, old carpets, dark spaces, ceiling tiles starting to fall off, dado trunking, not very attractive. And the scope of that was to do an entire strip out, Cat A fit out, new raised access floors, new ceilings, upgraded bathroom, lift, lobby cores to bring a lot of nice natural light into the building and a fresh new look and feel. So, and then it's always good after the project to, talk to the technical team who were there, boots on the ground, trying to deliver it. These buildings are more difficult and more challenging than new buildings. There's no doubt about it. There's a lot of unknowns before you even get in and start doing demo work. So on this particular building, there was quite a bit of structural repair work that had to be done. So the rebar was only 25 millimeters from the edge. Usually it would be 50, so they had to file back a lot of the columns and then recast concrete around it. The floor slabs were quite thin and didn't meet the required fire rating for multiple occupancy. They were only 75 mil thick, so they had to be thickened. The floor to ceiling heights, it's a challenge with these older kind of vintage buildings. They're usually around 3.1 meters floor to floor, which means it's very difficult to achieve modern standards, which would have 2.7 meters plus 600 mil ceiling void for all the M&E. So as well, the raised access floor was only 35 millimeters clear when usually you would have 150 mil. So there had to be creative approaches in terms of filing into the concrete to get wiring and cabling into the floor to try and save space so it can all cross. And we managed to achieve 2.4 to 2.5 meters in the base floors, and then the new floors on top, we could obviously make them as high as they need to be. Interestingly, on the historic Georgian buildings, it is exempt from a fire safety cert, but only for single occupancy. So if you want to put multiple occupancy in, you have to start fire rating all the walls and floors, and that becomes very messy, very complicated. So the decision was made to keep it as a single occupancy building. Some images of the rear facade before and after. So it was kind of typical, not particularly attractive kind of concrete block building. We replaced the facade entirely, and the sustainability credentials achieved are LEED Gold, which, to be fair, was mostly achieved by its location because it's so central. There are mechanically ventilated air handling units on the roof, fan coil system installed. There's solar panels, all new tech, new cycling and parking facilities, and the building is a BER A3 from what would have been below D before. So quite a good improvement. Some key takeaways from the project. So as I said, the decision for this to retain the building was commercial rather than for ESG. Embodied carbon was not really a consideration at the time. And from talking to the team, we kind of said that maybe demolish and rebuild could have been quicker because of all the structural repair works, and that was unknown at the start of the project. So doing, understanding the quality of existing structures, of existing systems in a building is really important to when it comes to deciding what to do with these old buildings. So, and many decisions have to be made on site after surveys, rather than a pre-tender design stage. And surveys really important. Your design stage survey, then your post demolition survey, so that you can understand what's going on. And there's always going to be a little bit of compromise and a little bit of limitation compared to a new building, whether it's ceiling heights or fire ratings. So just to kind of manage expectations of building owners and tenants, that it is possible, but maybe you're not going to get the shiny new product that if you were to do a new build. So some questions that retrospectively we thought we can consider, and it's great to see others going in way more detail about carbon calculating, but even a simple metric, if you take the financial cost comparison of all the repair work versus all the new frame, would that give you some hints as to what the differential is in carbon? Or can we just go to calculate the amount of carbon by using our modeling and our design drawings? So just to zoom back out, some kind of trends and research information that we've seen around the office. Identity and having a record, and this is important for tenants and building owners. We see, and building owners and tenants are coming together more and more because the market has slowed down. It's actually bringing them together to figure out what they can do with their buildings, which is a good thing. And it's just a few little tidbits of what we think that tenants find very important. So identity and having a recognizable HQ for a corporate business is very important. Light, bright, and breathable spaces. People will continue to work from home if their office environment is not an attractive place to go. That's a fact. There is an S in ESG, so and things are becoming more digitized as people are working remotely, but it is still really important to have that collaboration and bringing people together in terms of our working communities and how people collaborate. So trying to encourage good environments where people can collaborate on whatever they're working on, whatever their business does. Placemaking, really important. Placemaking really important for the attractiveness on the office. So not just what's going on inside the building, but what's going on outside. Is it a nice neighborhood? Are there nice shops and restaurants around? And historic buildings tend to actually have quite good characters, but then maybe some of the more modern ones don't, where they're on the outskirts of the city and they're built for car-based kind of living. So how can we try and reinvigorate and reinvent those buildings? A few more small. Everyone's asking, what's the future of the office? Where's it going to go with remote working, etc. We think that it has to be flexible, has to be dynamic. It is increasingly digital. Balance and structure is still important, and remote or hybrid working is here to stay in some shape or form. So how do we design office space to work with that rather than work against it? And a lot of old offices may not have what new offices have. And if we are going to reinvent them, we need to tick certain boxes that every tenant is going to look for in a building. It needs to be accessible by public transport. It needs to have really good cycling end of trip facilities, shower facilities, lockers, all that good stuff. Entrance lobby, not even wow factor, just a nice environment coming in. So it's a good place when you arrive into the building. Building facilities, good, making sure you have enough bathrooms, making sure you've got good quality Wi-Fi, etc. Having access to outdoor space, whether it's a shared courtyard on the ground floor or small terraces on every floor. And again, having good local amenities like cafes and bars and restaurants around. So making a case for reuse, what are the incentives, risks, regulation and perception? We know there's a physical risk if we don't act now. The climate is changing, we can see more rain every day. And then there's transitional risks. So, the cost of energy is rising, the building regulations are changing, and we have a way of doing things. The industry has to adapt to all of this. It's a moving beast, and we're all learning every day, moving along this journey. The cost of carbon. So, I mean, just quickly, if a building is less energy, it's less carbon, it's less cost. That's a good thing. So that's that's how we can try and make this work. If it's going to be less cost for people in the long term, we can maybe tackle some of the challenges around getting the buildings upgraded and the cost for that. Regulatory changes, EPBD has been mentioned already today. It is now targeting existing buildings for the first time, and the worst performing buildings need to be net zero by 2030, which is 5.5 years away. Building projects, as we know, it's minimum 3 years, could take 5-6 years. Market perception. So a lot of the leading companies, corporations are leading the way in terms of carbon emissions. They are starting to count carbon, and the smaller businesses are trying to keep up with that. And then there's obviously the state. The state are doing great work in terms of trying to capture all of the carbon, both operational and performance. And I'll summarize on this a few key challenges that around these types of projects. So there is no one size fits all solution. Every building is different, but we do see consistent themes across different building types. So the heritage, historical buildings like the Georgians, then there's the vintage 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s buildings. They tend to be narrow, with low floor to ceiling heights, small cores. They might have a raised podium where there's car parking. They don't do much for the street life atmosphere. And then there's the modern 2000s blocks, which have almost the opposite problems of the vintage. They have very deep floor plates. They might have been built for one tenant in mind. And they have their challenges because a lot of them are quite poorly rated as well if it was built before 2006, 2007. And cost, I mean, we find with our clients it's very hard to, they have a bit of a hesitancy to spend almost 60 to 80% of the cost of a new building when they're going to invest in an old building and refurbish it, because it might not, if the end product might still be substandard. So trying to convince the investment is going to be a challenge. And cost certainty, we need high contingency for these projects. There's quite the unknowns that you're going to find with any renovation. And building regulation challenges, older buildings tend not to comply with today's regulations, whether it's building control, disability, fire, heritage, and planning. So that all can add to complications. It can add to cost, and it can add to the challenge of it. So just being aware of those things. And I suppose not to end on the hard parts, we have seen great success with these types of buildings, reinventing old office buildings into new office buildings that are very attractive for people to come and work and enjoy. So thank you.
Thanks, Harry.